Welcome to the second episode of our Summer 2025 Breaking the Ice podcast series. I'm Jessica Shadian, President and CEO of Arctic 360, Canada's national Arctic think tank, and one of this summer's co-hosts. Well, amidst the barbecue, sunburns, and murder hornets that is Canadian summer, we are extremely thankful to have four exceptional guests join us today to talk about something that is more, well, cold than hot. Innovating out of the Arctic. Will this be the next hot thing? Prime Minister Mark Carney began his post-election tenure with the priority for Canada to be strong on defence and strong on the economy. In June, the Prime Minister, alongside Minister of National Defence David McGuinty, delivered a defence announcement outlining coming investments and priorities for D&D. Quoting the readout, now more than ever, we need to defend our sovereignty and safeguard Canada's people and interest. The announcement included meeting NATO's commitment of 2% of GDP, which following the NATO summit is now increased to 5%, with 1.5 dedicated to defense and security-related investments like infrastructure and industry. Well, announced priorities included bolstering Canada's defense industrial capacity, developing new drones and sensors to monitor the seafloor and the Arctic, investments in modern and secure digital infrastructure, support for Arctic over-the-horizon radar, and building capacity in AI, cyber, quantum, and space. Toward the latter, the Prime Minister also announced the launch of the Bureau of Research, Engineering, and Advanced Leadership in Innovation and Science, or Borealis, God to the north, backed by a $2 billion endowment, according to one source. And to support the overall aims of the new defense plan, D&D will work with Canada's defense industry to create a comprehensive defense industrial strategy. Canada's new defense plan comes as NATO itself takes note of the accelerating geopolitics of the Arctic, and there is increased attention to NATO's northern flank, as well as the need for preparedness for cold weather operations and accompanying cold weather innovations. So is the Arctic then Canada's means to be strong on defense and strong on the economy? Defending Arctic sovereignty and growth through dual-use cold weather innovations out of the Arctic? Well, to unpack and discuss all of this with us today, we have Glenn Cowan, CEO of 19, Kevin Reid, President and COO of the Defence Security and Resilience Bank, Dr. Jackie Dawson, full professor and Canada Research Chair at the University of Ottawa, and researcher in residence at the Office of the Chief Science Advisor for the Government of Canada. Lastly, we have Patrick Schneider-Sikorsky. He was partner at the NATO Innovation Fund, and we're really happy to have the four of them come speak with us today. So before we turn it over further to them to introduce themselves, I'm going to turn it over now to our co-host to get us started. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. And hi, everyone. My name is Mishal, and I am a master's student at the Monk School. And I'm originally an international student from Pakistan, and this is my first year in Toronto. And I'm really excited to be part of this conversation and explore more arguments about the Arctic, which is something I wouldn't have been exposed to back home. I'll now hand over to Jaiden to introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jaiden Stevens. I'm from Norman Wells in the Northwest Territories here in Canada. I started my own business doing digital media and marketing work online. And in the fall, I'm going to be going into school for journalism. And I'm excited to be having this conversation with you all.
Okay, let's start with introductions. Perhaps we can start with you, Glenn. Please tell us who you are and what is 19.
Hi, thanks for having me this morning. My name is Glenn Cowan, and I am the founder and managing director at 19. We are Canada's only defense and national security focused venture capital fund. I come from a military background. I've seen sort of firsthand how emerging disruptive technologies, when integrated into national security mission sets, can be an incredible force multiplier. And so at 19, we build, fund, and scale the disruptive technologies that we think are going to enable Canada to win.
Good morning, and thank you for hosting this, Jessica and team. Kevin Reid, I'm the President and Chief Operating Officer of the Defense Security Resilience Bank, which will be, when stood up, will be the world's newest multilateral bank, servicing NATO members and Indo-Pacific member nations. For my journey to get here has been one as an entrepreneur, starter, builder of companies from an engineering firm that became one of the world leaders in WMD, UN weapons inspectors, to a software company. Always wanted to build a bank since university, so I did that. We became Canada's second largest corporate trust company. Never worked in banking, but we had a great run that we ultimately sold it to the Toronto Stock Exchange. And I've been an honorary colonel for 9 years in our forces, served as Singapore's consul general to Canada for 3 years. And so I became aware of the Defense Security Resiliency Bank in late 2024 from the founder, blueprint writer, Rob Murray. Met him down at Mar-a-Lago as he was briefing President-elect Trump in mid-January. And from that moment on, our organization has been taking off to the point where tomorrow we'll announce our major global banks as anchor partners, and we launch our 40-nation introductory kickoff sessions to the stand up of the bank in September.
Thank you so much. Jackie, if you can follow up.
Sure. Yeah. Also, thanks for having me. It's nice to be talking about such an important thing at such an important time. So, I'm a Canada Research Chair at the University of Ottawa, and all of my research is around climate change impacts, risks. So, do a lot of risk analytics, mostly in the Northwest Passage, Northeast Passage, transpolar route. We do a lot of analysis looking at how the ice is going to change and move, and what that means for potential economic development and opportunities, but also security and defense needs. I also am the retired director of ArcticNet, which is Canada's network center of excellence in Arctic science. And I serve Mona Niemer, who's our chief science advisor to Prime Minister Carney, and support her in files on Arctic science.
Thank you so much, Jackie. And finally, Patrick, please, if you can introduce yourself.
Thank you. Yes, and thank you so much for inviting me on this podcast. It's really great to be here. So my name is Patrick Schneider-Sikorsky. I'm a partner at the NATO Innovation Fund. My background is in venture capital, and prior to that in corporate intelligence and foreign policy. So the NATO Innovation Fund is the world's first multi-sovereign venture capital fund, set up by NATO, backed by 24 NATO allies as limited partners. And our mission is to invest in emerging and disruptive technologies across the alliance, but specifically focused now on the 24 European countries that have invested in the fund, investing in technologies that can deliver capabilities that will make the alliance stronger, more secure, and more resilient. So we invest across technology areas ranging from AI to autonomy and robotics, space technologies, quantum, biotech, communications, and materials. And we have been up and running for 2 years and made over 20 investments so far, both in direct investments. So those are companies ranging from seed to Series B stage, and also we invest in other funds too. So very happy to be here.
Thank you, Patrick. So right out of the bat, just to kick things off, let's just jump right in. Given Canada's focus and commitments to Canada's defense and security, do you think there's a window of opportunity right now, not just for Canada to strengthen its defense capabilities, but if done well, to position Canada as a global leader in innovation? Glenn, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, I mean, we're very focused on what appears to be this immediate window in terms of Canada all of a sudden having woken up to this new geostrategic, geopolitical reality. I think the first thing we need to do is just accept the fact that we've collectively been asleep at the switch for about 20 years, 25 years. And this is not a new phenomenon. This is just something that we have neglected. And so while there's a lot of energy in the sector, which is appropriate and it's good to see for folks that are focused on this, we are fighting a significant uphill battle to just play catch up. And I think that's really important to sort of understand that right out of the gate. Now, on the positive, to your point, we have the ability to now learn from sort of others that have done this with varying successes, and that's sort of along our allies, and we can close that 25-year-ish deficit a lot faster now, sort of learning best practices. And so I would just encourage that as we sort of rise to this occasion, we don't try to reinvent the wheel, and we just sort of adopt best practices that we know work, that are validated, and we move quickly to capitalize on this. But it's really important that I think we have the appropriate ecosystem and education in place to really help bring Canadians as sort of a population and culture along to meet this moment. I'll just pause there.
Kevin, Jackie.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I guess I would open by saying what I often say, which is the Arctic is our front yard. We think of it as this sort of beyond the yonder, far off place, but it's not. We're a strong and important Arctic nation. And we, like Glenn said, I'm sort of paraphrasing, but we should act like it. I completely agree. We're behind the times. And we're also, I don't think that we do a great job of working together. So I think I see a lot of easy wins here in this window, as Glenn said, because we do have a lot of catch up to do. But there's a lot of little things we can do immediately, closing the silos, working together. And you heard there's money in the ecosystem, which is always a challenge. But now we need to figure out how do we work together? And that's everyone from, private sector, security, government, and research. The research ecosystem, we aren't organized. So we like to think that, we're scientists, we've got this, dialed. We don't. We need to work together. We need to bring together engineers, hydrologists, climate scientists, et cetera. We need to work in the real world. Discovery-based science is fundamentally important, but so is applied-based science, and that's what we need to focus on in the next little while to get through this. And I think we can. I'm optimistic.
Jessica, I jump in here. I think a few months ago you coined in a Globe Mail article the Arctic Seaway, and I think that really frames the thought process quite well. Nature's opening up the Arctic, whether we agree or disagree. It's opening up, and so with that comes enhanced threats from people nations who want to do harm to us, whether it be Russia and China, or it's a commercial opportunity. Either way, the Arctic is opening. And from a shipping perspective, we all know that this will rewire the shipping routes that won't go through the Suez Canal and perhaps even in some cases the Panama Canal. You're changing the economic framework. You're also opening up the opportunity for our minerals, our oil and gas. I can tell you, I was on a call last week with members in Alaska, and all part of the U.S. investment cycle coming in. They're looking at already committed about $70 to $80 billion going into Alaska, and that money is there. It's being deployed. It's being worked up. They're good. They're building ports. It's engagement. So we have to have a sense of urgency in this country, and if we don't understand that, we're going to lose it. And that has to start within the political will and the people. We have to have a sense of urgency, and so the Arctic is wide open for us to either grab it or we lose it.
Looking specifically at the Arctic region, neglect of Canada's North spans decades, from deficit of critical infrastructure, from reliable and affordable energy to transportation infrastructure, and high broadband is nothing new. On top of this, the Arctic is undergoing rapid transformation from climate change, and it's impacting the existing infrastructure. As a result, Northerners are exposed to disrupted supply chains and a new national defense security risk. Do you see Canada's current defense commitments, including high aims to attract private capital investments, as well as being sufficient enough to innovate at the pace that is required to meet the escalating environmental, economic, and security demands for our North? If not, what specific changes are needed to accelerate this?
Jaiden, that's a lot to unpack with one question. Glenn, I don't know if you have want to take a first lead on that one.
I kind of laugh because I've had a little bit of a humbling awakening to the challenges and the intricacies of the Arctic. I really just started doing business there about a year ago. At 19, we've been centering and focusing our efforts around some key relationships and opportunities that we're seeing emanating out of Iqaluit in Nunavut. And we've been building our networks and meeting the right people. Now, the adage that we're just going to go to the Arctic and build something is laughable, in the sense that again, I'm no stranger to operating in harsh terrains and frontier environments and having to plan logistics and contingency plans for the types of movements I've done in my military career. But Iqaluit's a city of about 8,000 people, and you can't really go more than 10 kilometers from the city center without a really robust contingency plan in the winter. Just my last trip, I buried my truck and had to walk back into town, and it was kind of scary in the sense that I was only about 7 or 8K walk, which isn't much, but the temperatures that were there was really challenging. And so just the concept that we're just going to go and build something is years in planning, and we do need to speed that up. And I'm not trying to delay, but I'm just saying we need to have you have to live there or be there or have a foot on the ground or integrate with the people that understand that terrain really well. And that's not a guy like me from Ottawa who just parachutes in a couple of times a year and thinks I'm going to become an expert. And so I think involving Inuit, First Nations, Aboriginal people are so key to the development of the Arctic because the northern populations are the folks that are on the ground. And they understand the challenges, the logistics requirements, the cultural requirements. Where there's a gap is like, how do we and what do we integrate into that environment? And that's where I think folks like us play a role in helping build it, is understanding sort of best in class types of technologies that might build and support these types of infrastructure projects. But the idea that we just kind of, go in on a whim and set this stuff up and pretend like we have an even remote understanding of the challenges that are going to be kind of pacing the types of builds that we do, you got to have a foot on the ground and a presence. And I think your question, Jaiden, is a strong one. But like, for folks that are and companies and entities or military units that just think they're going to go into that environment, really need to do a lot of homework and research, acclimatization and understanding of just how things need to be a little bit different to maybe integrate and work correctly in that environment.
Can I just jump in for a second, Glenn?
Yep.
Completely agree. It's super interesting what you said, because I think that if we're looking at it through a kind of venture lens or a technology lens, we kind of the way that we think about deploying capital at the NIF, and where we think about actually which companies and which technologies we want to back is very capability led. And what you're saying is that we're not quite at the stage yet where we even have a full understanding of the types of capabilities that we're going to need, because we haven't spent enough time, or our kind of warfighters haven't spent enough time in those harsh environments.
Yeah, I mean, as a deployer of capital, if I'm going to make an investment in a company and I think it's going to operate in the Arctic, but I don't take it there and actually validate it firsthand, then I'm throwing darts at a dartboard. I'm just
exactly.
I'm air plucking things I think are going to work.
It's similar to the kind of way. Sorry to interrupt, but the way that kind of you'll see autonomy startups kind of claiming that that this would be useful in Ukraine, for example, when they actually haven't been out and tested their technologies on the battlefield or on the front line.
It's an interesting analogy to draw an environment like the conflict in Ukraine. And they say in our business, Patrick, if we don't have teams or folks embedded right into Ukraine, then you're kind of dead in the water if you're thinking about making defense plays without understanding what's happening in the front line. The same is true in the Arctic. Like, to Jackie's point, it's our front yard. It's the front line in this new geostrategic reality of the world we're in. If we for a second think that we're going to have any type of enterprise or do anything in the Arctic and we're not physically there doing it, or learning or meeting people or networking or testing, evaluating or failing, like, we're just, doing the classic, analysis or paralysis by analysis and just talking through things. Like, I encourage people, just go there. Like, just go and meet people and start talking and learning and failing, really, to be able to sort of get those iterations quickly. Because I was floored by just how big the Arctic is. And it is you can't appreciate it from looking at a map or, talking or meeting people in boardrooms or in Toronto or Ottawa. Like, you're not going to get it. You're not going to have that kind of perspective. And so it's such an awesome luxury that we have such a beautiful Arctic in Canada. And there's so much opportunity and it's so vitally important. I would just say to people, like, go and learn, but you have to be on the ground to do it.
Yeah, if I could add in there, Glenn, it's absolutely true. I mean, I've been working in the Arctic for 25 years, and every single time I step off that plane, it just hits you right in the heart. It's the most beautiful place. It's stunning, and so many Canadians or anybody around the world hasn't had the chance to be there. One point I think I want to make as we sort of venture into this new world but old world is that we have to be really careful not to bring like a second or third or fourth colonization, like recolonization through investment or development, because the people that live there have experienced this time and time again. So your point, Glenn, about parachuting in and parachuting out, we have to learn from the mistakes that we've made in other sectors, research included. Research is the worst culprit. I mean, if you look at the history of researchers in the Arctic and government, it's terrible. But we've learned and we're getting better. So we have to make sure, I think that we need to work together between sectors that you're not even thinking about. that were already there. And I think training, we have to be fast, but the people that live there, they don't necessarily, I mean, some of them are engineers and innovators and business owners, but some of them are hunters and support their families. And guess what? They know how to get your truck out. They know where you should go and shouldn't go. They know where you should position whatever technology we're talking about. So it's also an enormous opportunity for developing Canada and reconciliation and just listening to the people that are there. And the last thing I want to add to this is vision. We've mentioned, what is our vision for this area? The Canadian Arctic is it's almost compared to Greenland, the European Arctic, certainly Russia, the USA, Alaska, we have hardly anything. So we have this opportunity to learn from all the mistakes that other people have made and to try to do it right and to do it in Canada's way with the values that we stand for, which includes, Indigenous people, the people that lived there first. And so what is our vision for this space? And we got to be quick about, sort of thinking about that. But I can tell you the people who live there, they know what their vision is for their homeland. And so, yeah, we need to work together.
I'll just say one thing, and I think we'll pivot over with Mishal has a question, but maybe leading into that question. Exactly. So we're talking about, and Jackie, I do have a follow-up for you on what you just said and everything what we've been talking about. But in thinking about vision, thinking about the fact that we're behind, but we also need to catch up. So, what does that mean in terms of being strategic and in terms of where is this an opportunity also to leapfrog, right? We're not going to build 1970s infrastructure because we never built the 1950s. So how do we build second half of the 21st century infrastructure and do it correctly and do it well and do it as it needs to be done? I think it's fair to say most Northerners would like to have the same standards of living as everyone else in Canada, and that entails some basic amenities in terms of transportation infrastructure, energy accessibility, and affordability, and broadband internet. But I think we'll pivot a bit. Michelle, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, no. Given our conversation right now, I think it's best if we talk about Canada's development of a defense industrial strategy. Specifically for Kevin and Glenn, I want to start with you. What must be the strategy focus on or include to ensure that Canada is able to attract the private capital needed for R&D and startup investments, but also attract the necessary Canadian capital to scale and to build a domestic defense innovation economy?
Bunny, okay if I take that?
Yeah.
So I think we have to, as part of building the industrial strategy, we have to recognize what our threats and risks are from a kinetic or military sense. A couple months ago, the Minister of Defense of Poland said we can either spend 5% of our own money, or we go into a war and we'll spend 20% of our budget to defend the war, or we have someone else's military in our backyard. And so that's a country that's on the front lines, as they said, in Europe, has had their country on the map and off the map a few times. And so we have to understand as Canadians, what is the threat and risk? I think a lot of people within NATO and the military circles believe that the weak link in NATO is Canada, the Arctic. Is that true? I believe so. I think Russia's built 14 super bases in the Arctic over the last 10 years. Stood up 475 smaller bases. China's opening their research labs everywhere in the Arctic on the Russian side. So if we don't understand that the real threat and risk is the Arctic territory, it's hard to plan for it. And I don't think our governments historically have done a great job on articulating what that threat and risk is and how we're going to defend it. And so that's part of the mission set of, we have to define what the threats and risks are. And if they haven't communicated it well to industry to say, this is where we're going, this is how we're going to defend it. We need industry to get behind building these next generation of defense tools.
Yeah, and I'll sort of look at that, your question, Michelle, from the private capital perspective. There isn't any, because Canada hasn't promoted any type of defense investment or security investment. Up until about a month ago, our federal crown corporations had a moratorium against getting involved in the sector. Our big five banks couldn't touch financing. The government would only really focus on the sort of cost plus, legacy contracts for big defense primes that we're still seeing them award on stupid technologies. Like even yesterday there was an announcement, we're continually failing. Canada is notorious for deploying yesterday's technology tomorrow. Like, we insist on fighting with our hands tied behind our back. And I don't get it. Now, here's the good news. That's changing. Private capital is going to play a critical role in this because we can just move faster than government. And guess what? We don't have to ask permission, and we almost have more money than they do. In like a pro rata kind of per capita kind of way. But a great example for Patrick, like Canada didn't invest in the NATO Innovation Fund. Like that is ridiculous. It was literally like a $50 million commitment to be called over 10 years. And we said no. Now, that's a billion euro fund. And you heard Patrick say that they're not investing in Canadian companies. So we immediately hamstrung all our startups to get access to this $1 billion because we didn't want to spend $5 million a year and being a part of a limited partner in that fund. Now, I think there is good news. This is all changing. Like we're helping inform the defense industrial strategy on the role that private capital can play. I'm educating the big banks on how big banks can leverage venture capital and how venture capital is a tool of national security to advance all these capabilities. From the Arctic specifically, not only is it our front yard or our front line, but it's our NORAD obligation. It's Canada's responsibility to own that piece of real estate from a sovereign protection, defense perspective. And contrary to the emotive responses that's coming out of the Trump administration with Canada, I have a newsflash for Canadians: like decoupling and not working with the United States is a terrible idea. The NORAD bilateral military alliance is the strongest bilateral military alliance in the world. And yeah, we're dealing with some tariff issues, but when I hear the president of the United States talk about border security, he's not talking about the 38th parallel. He's talking about the northern flank of the continent of North America. And that's our real estate. And when you look at NORAD's mandate to protect the approaches to North America, probably 2/3 of those approaches to North America come through Canadian international waters or Canadian airspace. And we have a North American obligation to step up and defend that. So this idea that and by the way, I mean, Jackie would know way better than I do, but like the wealth of resources that we're sitting on that are attractive to our allies and adversaries, Canada's not leveraging or utilizing our natural wealth to be the engine to drive this future mission. And so I think, just to summarize, the private capital community is going to play a massive role in supporting building the types of economies and companies that will answer and solve some of these challenges. And then in the context of the Arctic, it's not just a good idea. It's a responsibility and an obligation that we have to ourselves, to our continental defense, and then to our sort of global alliances. And to Jackie's point, to the northern communities that live there and are on that front line.
I want to pick up with Patrick really quickly here on some of the stuff that you had said, Glenn. In terms of and understanding entirely, yes, that was the point that Canada did not enter the first round and decided to opt out of that. You were talking about our big banks and not, wanting to go or being able to go into that, like let's say dual use space. I think that's something that's also that's changing. So it's new to many of the European banks, Nordic Investment Bank, for instance. Now they're changing their mandates and policies to be able to do dual use investments. And I'm curious for Patrick as to for the participating countries and many, throughout Europe and some have better access and less access to capital, though they have a lot of competencies. Do you see a shift in terms of the general investment climate throughout Europe, and in terms of the NIF itself? Are there very specific things that across the board should be ensured or required for the NIF to, besides being a participating country, of course, to be able to invest?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Things have shifted in Europe, and I think that some of the points that Glenn was making about attitudes towards defense, particularly in the kind of financial sector, banks having restrictions on banking dual use or defense startups, and insurance companies in Europe refusing to insure small defense SMEs. We had government, we had government funds that were investing in VC funds in Europe that were putting restrictions on those VC funds working with the defense sector, even in parallel with their own ministries of defense sending demand signals for specific defense technologies that they wanted from startups that those VC funds were looking to invest in and couldn't, because another arm of government and the kind of the more institutional bodies within the financial sector were against the idea. That's fortunately shifted. I mean, it's it could have happened sooner, but at least it's moving at a reasonable pace now. So we have we had the European Investment Bank shift its stance on defense. We had the European Investment Fund, the EIF, which is one of the biggest LPs of VC funds in Europe, also shift on defense. And it's happening in a slightly kind of, it's not happening in one fell swoop. It's sort of step by step. Whereas you see some institutions saying, okay, well, we don't like dual use, then going to, yeah, we're okay with dual use as long as it's commercial first. Okay, we're okay with dual use even if it's defense first, as long as they're. And so it's kind of like almost like in some cases, I think almost I guess it's kind of. They're planning to get there, and they're planning to get there, in the long run. But they kind of almost have to just theatrically go through these steps in order to show that it's not an extreme move. But so that's happened. Then also, since we launched the NIF, we've seen a lot more defense tech startups pop up, and these are these are startups that are focused primarily on the defense and security sector, although they're building on kind of off-the-shelf and commercially derived technologies, as opposed to, I guess, like government military research like you had decades ago. So there's definitely a lot more activity there, more defense-focused VC funds, or even generalist VC funds adopting defense strategies. So it's definitely changed, and it's obviously we've had to have several shocks to the system for this to happen in Europe. We had specifically the war in Ukraine, and it's great to hear that things are also shifting in Canada, and you're not waiting for the equivalent to happen in the Arctic before you shift strategy. But coming back to Canada and the NIF specifically, so I was not involved in any of the kind of negotiations of the setup of the NIF that happened before we actually launched. But Canada has expressed a desire to join the fund. Prior to the election, there was a statement on the Canadian government website saying that they would like to join the NATO Innovation Fund. So we welcome that. And in spite of the shortcomings you've mentioned in the ecosystem, I think Canada still has a very strong deep tech ecosystem. There are great research universities. There are private funds looking at these technologies already. So we think that they would definitely, and we've also seen some good examples of Canadian startups joining our sister organizations, NATO Diana programs, which is NATO's Defense Innovation Accelerator for the North Atlantic. So we definitely think that there will be some great companies to invest in if Canada were to join the NIF, and also some funds to potentially back. But in terms of what the government can do to kind of kickstart to accelerate the ecosystem for us, one of our main goals and our North Star in terms of NIF's mission is adoption. And so we have a whole team, a parallel team to the investment team, which we call the Mission Platform Group, which comprises many elements, but there's one of the main parts of it is the adoption team, and their job is to work hand in hand with the MODs that have backed the NATO Innovation Fund on sourcing demand signals and also providing insights to those MODs on like what technologies they're seeing in the market. So I think in the case of Canada, it would be the same. We want to work hand in hand with the Ministry of Defence, with warfighters and end users, to get a good understanding of the types of capabilities that Canada is looking at. And in this case, it would there'll be more of an Arctic focus than there would be with some European nations that we work with. So getting a better understanding of, because ultimately the companies we invest in are dual use. There has to be a government customer. They have to provide some sort of meaningful capability. So the way that Canada could support that is by working closely with us on the demand side and on the adoption side, as well as obviously investing in the fund.
That's it. I want to build a little bit on this, but because I want to talk about a missing piece that we haven't so much spoken to, and it's about I think goes to Jackie's comments about breaking down silos. So Jackie, this is for you. Coming back, to this defense industrial strategy. So it's not there yet. It's probably somewhere in the process, maybe more towards the beginning than even the middle of being built. So what is the role that research strategy, and particularly when it comes to the Arctic, what role should it play? Do you hope it could play? You and I keep talking, we've been talking at length, right, about Canada's opportunity to innovate out of the North rather than transferring all these innovations to the North. We talked a lot about, just now with the fly in, fly out. This is not going to happen from a bunch of people sitting around in, Ottawa or York University or whatever and making things up and thinking and hoping, though they've never been to the North, that this is perfect. We've also talked about CHARS, the Canadian High Research Station, Arctic Research Station. Where do you see a role in for Arctic and Arctic innovation to play in a new defense industrial strategy, and if there's a role to play, so how do we make that happen? What's required to get us there?
Well, these are the things I think about every day. I mean, it was great to hear Patrick say, Canada does have some strength. And, when you go to other countries around the world, I mean, I've just got back from Germany, which is a powerhouse in Arctic research, and heading to France in a week to talk about Arctic science and how we can work together. And the truth is, we're strong. We have a strong Arctic science ecosystem generally. We've been investing in Arctic science in a somewhat piecemeal way for decades on decades. And sometimes I think we need to shed this ideology or this sort of idea of mediocrity. And we need to stand up proud as an Arctic nation, and we need to invest collectively in Arctic science. As a unit, so often we're competing for funds. I mean, this is normal in science, in private sector. It is what it is. But where the magic is when you come together and you do something bigger than your own lab or your own university or even your own country. And so I think now's the time. And I've said this many, many times. I've written Hill Times articles. I've testified at Senate committees. We need an Arctic science strategy in Canada. We're the only Arctic nation that does not have an Arctic science strategy. There are so many non-Arctic nations that have Arctic science strategies. China, Italy, Germany, so many, and we don't have one. Now, I want to commend the government for issuing. Minister Jolie put out the oh gosh, Jessica, help me. The Arctic and Foreign Policies, the new
Arctic and Foreign Policy. Yeah, the new Arctic Foreign Policy.
Thank you. You can edit that. The new Arctic Foreign Policy. And in there, she does touch on, they do touch on research extensively. And I couldn't agree more. We need to innovate, and we have the opportunity. And as you said, Jessica, we can innovate out of the North and into the North. And we have in some ways, this blank canvas to do it differently than we've seen, in Russia and even in Alaska. Something I want to make sure that we and, your listeners know is 40% of the Canadian landmass is Arctic. And somewhere between 70 and 87% of our coastline in Canada is Arctic, depending on if you want to count all the little islands in the Canadian Arctic archipelago. But if you take that to 87%, and if you look at the infrastructure that we have built on our Arctic coastlines, I mean, it is there is nothing. But we do have the Canadian High Arctic Research Station. It still remains a state-of-the-art active space that we are not efficiently using, and we can. So for me, it's about systems. It's about collaboration and cooperation. Building icebreakers, we've been talking about forever. We need dual-use icebreakers. We have so many researchers that want to get on ships, and we've got money to get on them, and we do not have ships. But we end militaristically. We need ships up there. We need nearshore. We need offshore. And Davy's shipbuilding, the ice pack Davy's really promoted that. That's huge. The ice pack that we have between Canada, Finland, and the USA, we need to jump on that and go forward. Finland has the best technology for icebreakers. We're going to need icebreakers in Canada because the way that the ice flows, so the Arctic Ocean, the Arctic ice pack is breaking up because of climate change. But the way the tides, the winds, the everything that's happening, all that ice pack is flowing directly into the Northwest Passage. So we're actually going to have more challenging navigation in the future, right in our region. So we, it's not going to be easy going. So why don't we invest in these dual use platforms where we can do science? We can also have people on board observing what's happening.
You're bang on, Jackie, but we also don't need to have these exquisite systems. And this is where I think Canada can learn immensely from what our allies are doing. Every hunter and trapper, when they go out, they are a sensor.
Absolutely.
Every fishing vessel that goes out when the ice isn't there, they're a sensor. We should be equipping these people, these fishing vessels, these patrols, these communities with inexpensive technology stacks that allow for sensor and information collection to be just observed and then automatically pushed to a downlink and then pushed back to a central data repository. And newsflash, we pay these people for that. We put a smart mast with an EOIR sensor fusion with a mesh communication network and a satellite downlink that would probably cost, under 10 grand to put the whole thing in place. And every vessel that goes out is a collection platform.
Absolutely.
And we pay those people
for that for years. Yeah.
And our allies are doing it. It's not expensive. We don't need to wait for some shipbuilding policy and multi-billion-dollar procurements that we know are going to get hung up in this insane procurement system that we have. And so let's just democratize and saturate with as much collection. And that data is not just security or military data. It could be natural resource data. It could be climate data. It could be fisheries data. This is what we always say with drones and stuff is if we're integrating with autonomous systems, the robot doesn't care what it's looking at, right?
The trick is interoperability though, right? I completely agree. I think we need both, but we need a system. We need a system to bring that together. And we need to stop fighting over who wins the system, who gets the system.
Here's the really good news is there are some really awesome companies in Canada right now building that software layer, because all of the system that you just mentioned, Jackie, for interoperability, it runs on a software. Yeah. And so that's happening. And it's happening and it's privately funded. And it's a whole lot of smart people getting together and just saying, you know what, software owns the future. And we're going to create this common software, C4ISR, JADC2 software layer for the Arctic. It's being built right now. It's being built really fast. So
we have a responsibility. Oh, sorry, Glenn. You make me excited. So you go.
Shameless plug for anybody who's going to be listening to this podcast that has a use case in the Arctic that's going to require, a common command and control software to integrate, create interoperability, allow for the whole sort of C4ISR functionality to happen in commercial and civilian applications as well as military applications. Please reach out to 19 and I will connect you with the smartest team in Canada building this exact layer.
I love that. Okay. One thing is us scientists, we need to get organized because we own, my lab owns, 20 weather stations and this sensor and that sensor. And then so-and-so's lab from Calgary owns the same thing. Do we connect those things? Absolutely not. So we have a lot out there, but we need that.
And this, I think, goes, though, right back into this conversation about the role of strategy. First of all, we need a science strategy. And we need one that is able to separate basic research from applied research. And where I think we haven't been doing very much is on the applied research side. We have so many extremely intelligent, smart researchers, amazing. But it's been so much on the focus of to study climate change. And we don't do anything on the applied side about, okay, so what does that mean and what do we do about it? And so I think, going back to what we were just discussing, we need a system in place. We need something. And I also, though, if we want, first we need that, but we also, this is the opportunity, or it will pass if we're building an industrial strategy, a defense industrial strategy. How do we pull that together to ensure then that this kind of applied approach to issues in the Arctic can be brought into that? And this is where I think, when we talk about Borealis, I don't know, we talk about quantum AI, all this. Is anyone thinking Arctic at all? And Glenn, I would just quickly also, you're talking about it doesn't have to, it could be basic. It does, putting a sensor here and a sensor there. I personally look like being able to incorporate that into something highly sophisticated to do what we need to
100%. Do. It's very state of the art. So,
but it's also no, that's my point. It's
besides just smart.
It's actually really inexpensive, and it can happen really fast. And so and there's a turnkey model to make this happen from what our allies are doing. the Americans are really good at this. And so again, in our business, we've just sort of taken that approach to say, like, we can talk until we're blue in the face, or we can go and just start. And so again, like, we went to Iqaluit and we deployed a completely sovereign mesh communication network over Iqaluit. We integrated with a local partner. We integrated with a local telco. We just built it, and then it's providing support for a whole bunch of interoperability and interagency type folks, and it's also providing connectivity for a hunter or trapper that's going out on the ice if they choose to use it. And that's just like, it's this kind of land and expand model. But in terms of like, that's going to form, like, communications is going to form the backbone to the strategy. Because I mean, again, I'm not an Arctic expert by any stretch, but like one of my observations is like the Arctic is completely saturated with Starlink. Now, we can turn that can be turned off anytime we want. And we know for a fact that the next major conflict, which, I mean, if you don't think it's barreling towards us at 1,000 miles an hour, you've got your head in the sand. Like, if we're woefully naive if we don't think that's happening. That's going to be won or lost in the first 15 minutes, and it's going to be won or lost in space. And it's going to be control over satellites and communication. So we need to build the Arctic with the assumption that it's, not even just the Arctic. We need to build a resilient society with the assumption that things that we take for granted every day are not going to be there in the first 5 minutes of a conflict. And so, like, that's where this whole idea of sovereign capability is coming in. Like, and so, to Jackie's point on, we need a system and we need an interoperable structure. The backbone of that structure is command control communications. And that applies equally to running interoperable military operations with our allies, or connecting to research institutions, or even, like, just in its most simple form, is connecting, Inuit communities to each other, but also to emergency management. To it is this networked effect that is going to be built across this spine of a C4ISR command and control structure that Canada owns, and that we have control, agency, and sovereignty over how and where and when that's deployed, and who has access, and to make sure that we can maintain agency over the access and the control of that system, to sort of steal Jackie's word.
I wanted to, before we kind of get into wrapping up, this is all really good stuff. Jaiden, I think you wanted to ask a question, just kind of like connecting the North and the communities too.
In terms of the existing Northern Indigenous population in the North, we often talk about how the North isn't a blank slate. There's already people here doing amazing things. What do you see as being necessary to ensure that innovations out of the Arctic are being done in partnership with Northern Indigenous communities and align with their priorities, and so that they can equally benefit from the outcomes? Jackie, I want to start with you, as you won the Governor General's Innovation Award for your work with the Arctic Corridors Research Project, where you identified culturally significant marine areas and working to incorporate their knowledge into the research. Do you see the planned defense investees for dual-use innovation as having the potential to support Canada's efforts in establishing these low-impact shipping corridors?
Yeah, Jaiden, it's a great question, and I mean, absolutely. And I think we even opened with this. That's how important this is to the fact that this is a homeland. These are settled Inuit land claim areas, and First Nation treaty areas that have clear governance. So in some ways, we're in a major advantage space in Canada because we have these settled, agreed upon governance structures, with like clear legal agreements on how we proceed forward. And what that means is we've got a responsibility, but we also have this already in place. When you look at other places in the world that are still working through this, we are ahead. We also have very strong Indigenous leadership. Nathan Obed, the president of ITK, is a very strong leader and has already been in the news several times in having conversations around security, defense, and development. The trick is trust. So that, Glenn, you nailed it. The fly in, fly out model is just going to erode trust. We have to have people on the ground, like was stated by, I think, every person on this panel. And yeah, there's models to do this. And there are smart, intelligent, brilliant, innovative people on the ground. So we have to work together, and recognize that this space, we always say the Arctic is unique And it is. We've even heard it here. It is unique, but in other ways, it's not. It's part of Canada, and we've got the structures in place that we can move forward in, and we need to talk to the people that work there. So the Arctic corridors are basically shipping lanes through the Canadian Arctic, where where we're ensuring that local people's knowledge is infused into the development of where those shipping lanes go, so that we're enhancing the ability to hunt and to fish and to engage in local economic activities and development without having major disruptions from the economy. Well, guess what? When you do that, when you open that up and you work together in a trusting way, the ship operators, they don't want to ruin, the walrus hunt or the bowhead hunt. They want to avoid it. They want to support it. And then, so when you work together, there's these examples of how we can do this right. And back to the comment about communications being the backbone. That's exactly it. It's about communicating. It's about communicating from the beginning, creating a shared vision, and then communicating as we move forward. And I think that there's leadership in place, and structures in place. We just need to work together. I feel like we're always working kind of in our silos.
Yes. That's a great segue to sort of our observation in as we build out and start to understand how we want to start operating with our business in the Arctic. Is it's a total partnership, and from a early stage disruptive technology perspective, we go into these locations. We need to partner with Inuit people and Inuit companies so they can help inform us on how to best understand how we're going to deploy some of these technologies and capabilities. And then, what they're asking from us, what our partners are asking for us is, let's help do some skill transfer and capacity building on technology, and let's increase sort of the technology literacy among some of these communities and workforces. Because when you combine the local knowledge, the requirement for a foot on the ground, and then sort of overlay some of the gaps that they may have with sort of technology skill transfer, now we're creating like a pretty potent locally led workforce that sort of increases the overall productivity of these communities. And it's absolutely in every business's best interest to do that if they want to be working in that environment.
We'll pick it up. And so before we kind of do a quick lightning round with the Canadians, I really want to ask a quick question here to Patrick, because in his own professional career, I've seen that you've been in the startup space, focusing specifically on innovation around food security, health, data, autonomous systems space. Very similar to some of the challenges that we have in our own north. And I, just from this conversation here is, I think, probably a bit of a quick 101 for you on this. If you can, in your own way, have any thoughts when it comes to like innovation and food security? What did that look like? Health in the health space, et cetera.
Yeah, I in my previous fund, we looked at quite a lot of food, I guess food and health security. But there are obviously there are a lot of biotechnologies, and there are things out there like cell-based proteins and cell-based meats and so on. But I think that technologies like that hold a lot of promise. But I think I would be more focused on things that can actually provide food and health security in the here and now. Some of those technologies have been held up by regulation. Some of them haven't been able to scale at the pace that some VCs, even including myself, hope they would. So I would look at I would look to other countries that are that have particularly harsh and unfriendly environments when it comes to agriculture and things like that for best practices and for inspiration. So, for example, I know that like in the Middle East and in the Gulf, there are a lot of those nations are thinking about things like water and food security and what technologies they can basically insource and scale up in order to provide that kind of resilience and redundancy. But I think that probably having a cell-based meat strategy for the Arctic is not going to be realistic in the short term. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. However, I guess like with the way we look at capabilities at NIF more generally is that we kind of need to be we need to be investing in things that can be adopted and scaled in the near and medium term. But we also don't want to take our eye off the ball when it comes to potentially hugely impactful, but maybe more risky, less certain, less kind of more uncertain timeline technologies that could actually provide breakthroughs in the long run. So I'd say it's not either or, it's and both.
In our case, perhaps it's best that we stick to like the infrastructure issue and actually fixing supply chains, and that might be the best way to bring in healthy goods at a lower price. Okay. So this is a very quick lightning round. This just gets back to this question of you ask any Canadian, right, whether they think Canada has potential to do big things. It could be your neighbor, it could be the smartest person you know, but pretty much almost everyone will say without hesitation, well, yes, and then, but, and it's followed by this caveat of 96 things standing in the way. But we also know that, our Nordic neighbors, even China, they're starting to make strategic, policy and also investments to lead the world actually in cold weather technologies. So they actually believe that doing big things in the Arctic is possible, and for some necessary. So looking ahead, well, I'll start. Do you think Canada has the will and the wherewithal to bet big on the North? But if so, what is one tangible, concrete thing that we can all do when we get off this call in 5 minutes to help support that effort? Just one thing.
Right.
So we can't fix it all. I'll start with anyone who wants to jump in.
Make sure that Canada has a seat on the Golden Dome. Those meetings are underway. The planning's underway. Contracts are being let. And I'm in those discussions. I don't see any Canadians. Zero. We have no participation. It's almost like we didn't invest in the NIF. We're doing it again. And that's going to be built without our input.
Can I jump in and just and plug the NIF again? I would say investing in the NIF is it's not a silver bullet, but it would definitely help.
Yep. Absolutely.
I was with. We're in the discussions. Obviously, we want to collaborate in our fund with the NIF, looking at strategic co-investment. But Canada needs a pool of strategic capital that we can deploy into creating the Canadian venture ecosystem, as well as getting these startups into market that are going to fuel and drive this new wave of innovation and this new, very lucrative, very important, very valid market of building the Canadian startup ecosystem. And in relation to the Arctic, I would encourage those founders who are doing that to get out from behind their desks or labs or whatever and go to the Arctic and figure out firsthand how to build in that environment.
Absolutely.
And I would say, wearing my research hat, we need an Arctic research strategy, but one that incentivizes cooperation, not just among researchers, but among sectors as well. So incentivizing cooperation versus competition, because then we will be more competitive collectively.
I'm going to ask you, Jaiden and Mishal, is there something that you would like to see?
I would say just more resilient, shipping strategies, or for food security, just more ways for people to collaborate to solve these problems. Not too many different industries are working together to solve. I think if we work together, it could be easier to find solutions.
Let's talk about the North rather than with the North.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd say for someone who's fairly new to all of this, just a greater research pool into what's happening in the Arctic and just greater investment in the region for greater technology.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you all. I really do appreciate everyone's thoughts, comments. I thought those were really interesting and excellent conversations. So hopefully others will. I will just say on our end with Arctic 360, what we'll do is continue to do what we do, which is to help educate Canadians about the big issues, Canada's North, but also in the context of the Arctic as a region and the role of the Arctic in the world, in fact. I hope to see all of you. We can maybe pick this conversation up, if not before, but at our February annual conference. But what we need to do is not just keep rehashing the conversation in circles again. It's time to move forward and evolve and build off of these really good thoughts and the excellent expertise that we do have in Canada and outside. So thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank you very much.
This music is produced by Tulu Cat. We thank them for allowing us to share the music with our listeners, and we hope that you'll check them out wherever you listen to your music.
As a reminder, the views expressed on this podcast are the views of the participants alone and do not represent the views or opinions of Arctic 360, the Monk School of Global Affairs, or any other government or agency. Thank you for listening to Breaking the Ice. Follow Arctic 360 on social media to stay up to date on latest podcast episodes and Arctic 360 content. You can find us on all streaming platforms, LinkedIn and Twitter, or you can visit our website at arctic360.org. Thank you for listening. This is Breaking the Ice.